Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to be talking about Andrew Yang and the American family model generational ratchet and what his response should be during his presidency to this new cultural and societal American trend. All right, so this is pretty amazing. So basically, if you look at Pew Research, which is a widely respected research organization, they have shown a trend since the 1960s to current. The same trend for two different things, okay? And that is, one, two-parent American, for the U.S., for American two-parent households from 1960 to now, steady decline, right, for that period of time. The second one is U.S. birth rates, 1960 to now, steady decline, okay? Now we're starting with the numbers in 1960, right? But the reality is the problem comes from 1930 forward, all right? And when you look at those numbers, you see this steady decline in a two-parent household, steady decline in the U.S. birth rate, right? But when you look at the generations, okay, the silent generation, the boomer generation, Generation X, Millennials, and Generation Z, you see that with that graph, that's just a line, right? But if you look at the generations, you actually see what has happened. And that is, there has been an American family model generational ratchet, right? And what each generation has said is they're saying, okay, this is the model of the American family. We are setting this model here, and we're going to increase the rate of this specific model. I'm going to tell you each one of the models, okay? So, silent generation. Their model was get married, have kids, okay? At the macro level, right? They identified that model, and they increased it, right? And did it more than the generation before them, okay? All right. Then the boomers came along and they said, this is the new American family model. Get married, have kids, get divorced. At the macro level, they said, we're taking this American family model and we are going to increase it way more than the last generation, right? This is the model this is the American family model that we will accelerate, right? The Generation X sees this and they're like, oh, heck to the no. We're not going to follow that model. And they said, here's the new model. Here's our American family model that we are, as a generation at the macro level, are going to choose to accelerate. And that is, don't get married, have kids. Okay? And they did that. They accelerated that model more than any generation prior to them. Okay? The millennials saw what Generation X did, and they said, heck to the no. Here is the new American family model, which we will accelerate. Do not get married. Do not have kids. And they are accelerating that American family model right now, right? So it's been an American family model generational ratchet. Clack, 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 right? It's just the ratchet, the lever gets pulled and the ratchet pulls forward, right? And basically that is, that's showing you what each generation, the choice they made at the macro level and the American family model that they chose to push forward, that shows you exactly, right, what those numbers actually means. That's the narrative that's the story the numbers tell us, okay? It's pretty incredible, right? When we look at this, to me, in my opinion, I am beginning to think that this is absolutely the greatest challenge of Andrew Yang's presidency, okay? Excuse me. On January 20th, 2021, Andrew Yang drops into the presidency, okay? At that time, right, a whole lot of people think there are different issues that America has. I am now very quickly coming to the understanding that I think this is by far the worst problem, okay? And the reason why is I really feel like climate change, whether you're a climate activist or you're a climate denier, climate change doesn't matter. And the reason why is it's either a crisis and the whole country's got to get turned upside down, which the country has firmly declared they're not in the mood for that, or it's a 50-year problem and ain't nobody got time for that right now, right? Like, nobody cares. So, like, climate change, it's just a non-issue, right? Because they can't decide which one it is, and the country doesn't really have the stomach for, putting it into crisis mode. And I think also the country also understands whatever we do, whatever we decide, who cares? If like the other countries in the world aren't going along with us, it's throwing deck chairs off the Titanic, right? So the climate change is not really an issue for Andrew Yang, right? But this is a real issue, right? And the reason why is, one, now we can really see that each generation has been changing the American family model dramatically, right? Now why does this need to change, right? Can't we just all get along and just allow people to choose to not get married and not have kids? No, we cannot do that. And I'm going to tell you why, okay? The reason why we cannot allow people to not get married and we cannot allow them to choose to not get married and not have kids or the president can, right? The president has to speak to this. He has to choose policies that lead the nation in the right direction, or she, depending on whoever gets elected, right? And specifically Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang will not be able to ignore this. And the reason why is science, right? So there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Robert Waldinger, and he is the head of the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And one of the aspects of that study is what makes people happy. Bloomberg just did a great piece on this, and they had Robert Waldinger talking about, if you want to pursue happiness, absolutely nothing in an adult's life affects their happiness more than their marital status. That is why Andrew Yang will not be able to ignore this and will need to walk back the American family model generational ratchet. He'll need to stop it. He'll need to reset the clock, right? And the reason why is Americans are ignorant of science, right? And this specific science, right? And, and Andrew Yang's a data-driven candidate. He pays attention to this kind of stuff. And as the president of America, there's no way Andrew Yang's going to allow the American people to hurtle headlong into a decision that will make them fundamentally unhappy at rates higher than ever's happened before, right? And Robert Waldinger's research, Harvard's research, has showed this. If you want to be happy, you need to have marital satisfaction. Absolutely nothing affects a person's happiness or their health more than that. It's the number one thing, right? So since now, a whole bunch of candidates could easily ignore all this information, right? But Andrew Yang, since he's a data-driven math person, make America think harder, right? He's going to realize this, and he's going to say, oh my gosh, the American family model, generational ratchet, we can't let this stand. The clock's got to get reset, right? So, it's an incredible finding. It is really an incredible finding. And because Andrew Yang is going to want Americans to have a chance at being happy, he can't let them go headlong into this decision that they've decided, right? And now, you can't let it stand, right? You're going to have to set this back. You set it back with policy, and you set it back with presidential speech, both of which are incredibly powerful, right? So how do you do this? Well, one, I think because this is such a huge systematic problem, so I already talked about how Andrew Yang should allow this new revelation about American family models to impact immigration, right? But it's also going to need to impact how he specifically deals with each generation. So Andrew Yang is going to need to set in a model of how he actually interacts with the American people, specifically by generation. And he's going to need to do different things for each generation. So for the silent generation, right, what is he going to need to do for them as the president? Well, the biggest thing he's going to need to do is just honor them. They're all dying, literally, right? Like they're super old and they're all just going to die, right? So what he can do is say, hey, silent generation, we recognize you fought, in World War II. We're still a nation because of your fervor. Thank you. We honor you, right? And across the board, right? He's just going to need to honor the silent generation. I think he should spend about 3% of his time on the silent generation because they're a really small group and they're dying, right? All right, so and they're not dying for a bad reason. They're dying because because it's time for them to die. Like, it's just that's natural progression of humanity, right? Right. So, just from their age, that is a natural progression, right? That's what I was trying to say. All right. What does he have to do with the boomers? Well, with the boomers, I think the biggest thing he needs to do is he needs to call them to acknowledge what they did, right? And it's really important because the boomers have an incredible amount of power. They're going to be they are senior citizens of this nation, right? They vote like crazy and they have an incredible amount of power. So as a president, I think he needs to call them to acknowledge what they've done because the reality is that's what set all this in motion, right? The boomers said the new American family model is get married, get kids, get divorced. And they increased that family model, that American family model, more than any generation prior to them, right? And they set it as the template. And then in a reaction, Generation X was like, oh, heck to the no, we ain't doing that. And then the Millennials saw the Generation X and was like, no, we're not going to do that either, right? And so at this point, I really feel like the president, Andrew Yang as president, will really need to call the boomers to acknowledge the damage they've done and say, listen, we need you to not damage this nation further. I'm going to take specific actions with the Generation X and with the Millennials, and you need to stand back and let me get this done because you really broke the American family model. Like, the boomers are responsible for breaking the American family model. Like, that's super clear now, in my opinion, right? All right. So he's going to need to call them to acknowledge that and say, you really need to step back as I establish policy and speak to these issues to fix this with Generation X and specifically with the Millennials, right? So with the Generation X, what action does he take with them? Well, specifically, Andrew Yang would need to encourage Generation X to prioritize their children, right? And say, listen, as a culture and a society in America, we absolutely have to sacrifice far more than we are right now for our children. We got to get better at delivering for them and making sure they have what they need and making them into strong, independent people, right? And so Andrew Yang would need to really, through policy and speech, he would need to encourage Generation X. And he can do that through taxes. He could do that through law. He could do that through speech. Encourage Generation X to prioritize children in a way that was not done by the boomers. It was not done by the boomers, right? Like the through divorce, they were saying, hey, I don't, other generations, they certainly want to, there were times where they were like, hey, we would really like to divorce. And they were like, well, we got kids, can't do that, right? We've got to prioritize these children. And so Andrew Yang is going to would essentially be calling Generation X back to prioritization of children over their own desires and their own, what they want, right? And then last, for the Millennials, Andrew Yang will need to, through taxes, through law, through speech, would need to absolutely encourage Millennials to absolutely return to the silent generation's model, the American family model, which would be get married, have kids, get married, and I mean now with the new law, it would be get married, have kids, get married, acquire kids, right? And he would need to encourage the whole nation to the entire millennial generation to get on board with this. And the reason why is he says, if you don't do this, you're all going to be very, very unhappy. We know this through Harvard science, right? And like, this is huge. Like, this is, and the other thing is, like, I think, it's so clear there are 25 people running for president, and they all want, that they want the big chair, right? They want the throne. And I'm not sure any of them really understand the full weight of what is going to fall on this next president, right? And one of the things, and one of the reasons why is I look at this, right? And this American family model generation ratchet, this all happened because of technology, right? Technology allowed each one of these generations to choose a different model and then to accelerate that model, right? It was impossible to do that before the 20th century, right? And so Andrew Yang, again, he is so brilliant, right? He sees that technology is the main driver of all American political, cultural, and social trends, right? He understands the danger of automation, but the dangers that technology have presented in our world, the changes that they presented, go so far and broad and wider than we ever expected, right? And he's going to have to ratchet this stuff back and get it corrected, which is pretty amazing. And one of the reasons why I'm voting for him is he's data driven, right? And when you have pure science, you have to listen to it. You have to take actions that come from science, right? That's very, very clear, right? So so that is my opinion. That's the vision that I see. I think it's incredibly clear that this American family model generational ratchet is in full swing, and Andrew Yang as president is going to have to reset the clock, right? He's going to have to tell the millennials, you have to return to the silent generation's American family model, because if you don't, you are all doomed to deep unhappiness based on science. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.